Hey chatters, we're back figuring out how the heck we're going to code without having any idea how to code. Oh man. Okay, so here we are in VS Code again, and now we're actually going to look at some code, get it in here, run it, so you can understand what we're going to be doing as we move forward and how to really start coding with the help of large language models. So the first thing we're going to do is you're going to want to open up VS Code, of course. This is where we're going to be doing the thing. And again, there's two options here for getting to your code. You can either clone a GitHub repository or you can open a folder. I'm just going to show you how you would clone the repository quickly, but we're going to open the folder because that's really what you're going to be mostly doing. You always have the option to clone a repository. We're going to do that just quickly. I'm just going to pick some random one from my variety of things here. Why don't we just do the good old professor? And it's going to just bring up this window to save it somewhere. So if I go to documents, I have this nice little code folder and click on that. You can select this as the destination. It's going to ask if you want to open it. And you'll see here, it has now opened the repository. And we have a couple files in here, which are just the text files and the README for the good professor. There is another way, which is we can do it straight from GitHub. Let's head over to GitHub for a second, and I'll show you how to download the file and get it into the system. Here we are at my good friend James's GitHub, forget about it. And he has created a nice little web crawler for us. Now, this is going to be very important moving forward, because essentially this is going to allow you to scrape websites to get that text data in and get it into your Obsidian Vault, for example, to be used. As you see here, he's very good with the README. Again, I want to push that again. Do the README, make it really detailed. You're going to thank yourself later. But here we are, and again, we might be a little confused. What do I do? If we're downloading code, again, you can clone it straight from VS Code, but we can also go to this little button called Code. We bring it down, and you'll see here we can download the zip, or again, we can just bring it straight into VS Code with this link, but we're going to download the zip just for an example. I'll put in my downloads. I've already downloaded it before. It's going to be zipped, so we want to right-click that guy, and we're going to do extract all. I'm sorry for you Mac users if this is a little different. And then you're going to notice we have this web crawler main here. Now, something I want to point out. When this unzipped, it unzipped with web crawler main 2, and then I go in and we have web crawler main, and then we go into the code. So you want to be thinking about, I want this deeper full folder, not this folder right here, okay? Because otherwise you're not going to be able to run the code. So we're going to want to find this webcrawler.main in VS Code. So let's head back over there. So here we are again in VS Code. And remember, I said we're going to want this open folder. It'll bring this up. We're going to want to go to downloads because that's where I put it. But would highly recommend just create a folder somewhere in your computer called code or whatever you want to call it. And you're just going to keep all your code folders there. So remember, we want to go into this main folder right here. We're going to do select folder. Okay, here we are. We're almost ready to get started. So you'll notice here in our file explorer, like I said, we have the name of the folder, and then we have all these little files here. This is actually not a lot of files. It gets a lot crazier once you keep going. Now, one thing I want to point out, right here, you're going to see this is called index.js. Okay, JS stands for JavaScript. When we show you some Python, that's going to be .py. So you don't have to do too much, but if you change this name, you just want to make sure it has that extension, that dot whatever of the code that it's actually in. Another one I want to point out is git ignore. This one's going to be very important if you're sharing it out with other people. And all this file is, as you can see here, is .git ignore. That's all you have to put in there. It's not going to show up in the beginning. You got to make it yourself. And then you can just list the different files and folders you don't want to get pushed to GitHub. This becomes very important if you're doing things with API keys, for example. You don't want to be pushing your API keys to a public GitHub. You're going to have a bad time. But you can see here, and we don't see any of these yet over here necessarily, but once you do this, you're going to notice that this is not getting pushed to GitHub. So very important to have that git ignore. Now to dive into the code. Let me be clear. I have almost no idea what any of this does or what it means. I'm starting to be able to intuit more as I do more, but in reality, I don't really know what's going on here. Beyond, of course, where we put sort of comments. So you'll see here in the green, we have slash and configuration constants. And so this is James putting in comments around, okay, this is what this block of code more or less does. So I was pushing you for the README. When you start getting into the actual coding bit, you're going to want to put comments. And it's easier now than ever with large language models, especially if you're using them to do the coding. All you're going to have to do is be like, hey, what does this block of code do? Or let's go block by block in this code and add the comments. So it's really important to do. But you'll see here, it tells us what this code is doing. Now, this code, again, is helping us to scrape websites. This might be overwhelming, but we're going to walk through it. So we'll put this code in the comments, but you're only going to have to change 2 things in here based on your needs. This base URL and the selectors. Okay. Let's think about what is a website that we might want to scrape, and then let's work on scraping it using the code. One of the things I scrape nowadays is API documentation. For those of you who don't know what APIs are, think of them as a connection between a service and what you want to do. For example, we're here at OpenAI. If you want to be able to use T, but not in ChatGPT, and instead hook it up to some program or other that you can use, or you're trying to make some sort of software that uses it as part of it or wraps around it, you'll use their API. It's really important to understand how these APIs work, especially for the coding. And as we'll see later on in subsequent videos, you can use this documentation to give it to the large language model, to give it as context for it to help you code what you're trying to code. Documentation is usually like this, where you have multiple pages that are doing different things. And I started off having to copy and paste this into my Obsidian. It took so much time. Now we can do it in seconds. So the first thing we want to do is get the base URL. And what that means is you want to find the sort of version of the URL that's going to have everything you want. And then it's going to scrape everything that is connected to that parent page. So if we, for example, if I just delete API reference introduction and it just has the docs and I go there, it's going to bring me here. And you can see it put this overview here. And what that tells me is that this /docs is the parent that I'm looking for. So what we're going to want to do is just copy and paste from that point. We're going to bring up good old VS Code, and then we're going to stick that right here with this example. Now, be careful. Make sure you're keeping these little guys, these little apostrophes or whatever, there, because this lets the code know that I'm looking at this as text, essentially, as a string, rather than you can see all these other kind of funky colors as part of the code. So this is essentially like, okay, I'm inputting this. This is the thing I'm looking for. The next thing we're going to might need to change is the selectors. I'm actually not going to do this. I should show you guys. I'll show you guys. So the selectors are the things that are telling you where on the page am I pulling from? What am I actually scraping? Now, for the most part, you're not going to have to change this because most websites are just going to have this as their standard. But you know how things are. Everyone wants to do their own thing, and so they might not be standard on the website you're looking at. So we actually might have to pull from the website the part of the page that we wanted to scrape. So let's go back to OpenAI and check that out and see how it works. Okay, so if you didn't feel like a hacker already, this will probably do the trick. So what we're going to want to do is figure out, again, what is that little snippet that's letting us know where on the page we want it to scrape. So you're going to go to the page that you want to scrape. We're going to right click and you're going to see this inspect. We're going to click this and it's going to bring up something called the developer console. We're going to get more into the developer console in the future. But the idea here is you can see all this funky language. When I hover over it, it is highlighting specific things. And so we want to find the thing that we want to actually scrape. So if we go down, we'll just keep going just to see what's good. That one looks pretty good. Okay, so this one seems to contain pretty much everything that we want. And so what you're going to see is we have div class equals markdown page, markdown content, docs introduction, block quote. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pull this top one. So markdown dash page. We're going to come back to here and we're going to follow this pattern, right? So we had the div dot markdown dash page, and we should be all set. This might get confusing. You might struggle with this. Again, this is something I recommend. Just ask ChatGPT. If you don't know how to do it, highlight the part that you want to highlight, and you should be all good. Okay, and that's all you got to change. And now we're going to actually run the code. The first thing we need to do is we go to terminal and new terminal. Now, I actually like this hotkey. I prefer it, so I'm going to show you that in a second. But if we do Control Shift backtick, that's the one with the little squiggly line on the top left of your keyboard, it'll bring this up. You're going to see here, I don't have to navigate anywhere. We have just users, Joseph, down. It got me to the folder where we're at right now. Now, there are different ways to call on the program depending on the language you're using. Again, we are in JavaScript, in particular Node.js. And so to run your program, you type in node, and you'll see it's in yellow, space, and then we want to do the file we actually want to run. In this case, we're lucky, we're not going to get confused. We're just going to do node index.js. You just type that in, we're going to hit enter, and we're going to immediately run into a problem. So you'll see here we have all these issues here. We're like, what the heck happened? And this is because we didn't install the packages we need to install. So this is really important to understand, is that usually you have your code, but your code is actually pulling from other people's code and libraries. So if we look up here, you're going to see things like Puppeteer Cluster, Puppeteer Extra. So we need to install these things first. Now, typically when you write your code, there's different ways to do it, but you'll have it in your code and it'll know what to install. You just need to actively install it. Again, in Node and JavaScript, how we do this is we type in npm install, or if you're lazy like me, you can just do npm just I. So let's hit enter. Loading. Okay, we have what we need now. So everything's downloaded. Now we can do our node.js. So node index.js, and we'll run that. And you'll see up here, we have a couple things that have been added. The first is the node modules. So if we open this up, you're going to see this is all the stuff that we installed essentially to make this thing run. And then we have our crawled pages. And you can see here, it's starting to put everything in here. So we can go to tutorials, models, the guides, and it's just starting to scrape everything. And that's pretty much it. So this is how we run our first program. Go find a website you want to scrape. You're going to, again, come into the scary code. You want to find that sort of parent part of the web page that you want to scrape. And you'll see here, it's finding everything that is doc/whatever. It's just going down that rabbit hole. And then try running it without adding anything and see if it works. If it doesn't, you can go into the website, right-click, inspect, and try to find and highlight the part that you're actually looking for. And that's it. You have run your first program. So all these links for you to actually run this yourself will be in the GitHub. And I guess get to scraping and let me know how it goes. Thanks, chatters.